the Department of Defense CIO not to provide the requested information to the committee because of the tone of a letter?
No, I did not, but I would like to explain what, in my view, has happened. You called me in September 2015. As the Chief Operating Officer of the Department of Defense, I oversee developing a defense program for the Secretary in accordance with his strategic guidance. As a result, I am responsible for every single aspect of that program. And as you can imagine, certain items do not rise to my level of attention, and certain do. In September 2015, you called me and asked me to personally get involved in reviewing the information that was being provided. And I committed to you that I would. We briefed you and the two other chairmen in March. At that point, you brought up new information that was new to me. You said, I don't believe that you're being served right in the information on the communications, and I don't think you're being served right by the information on housing. I committed you to do a deep dive, which we did. That deep dive was finished in May. Since May, we have been trying to get that information to you. From the very beginning, Mr. Chairman, I thought this was a communication between you and me. You asked me to do this personally for you. All of the interactions that I had were with you and the other chairman, and we offered to provide this information to you. We were told that you would not want to receive it. We actually had a hearing scheduled in September, which was postponed. I regret that this information was not communicated, but we have had the information since since May, and we have been trying to communicate it to you.
So the issue with this was your Chief Information Officer refused to, or the department, I shouldn't say you or the Chief Information Officer, said the reason that you would not brief the committee staff was because of the tone of a letter. But you did remind me of one thing, in that I do remember that phone call, and I just, for the record, you do acknowledge that I informed you that the Congress had been given false or misleading information in that September phone call.
I understood that was your opinion. Yes, sir.
Okay, so you were informed by this committee that we were provided false and misleading information by the Department of Defense.
I found no indication that that was true.
So I'm going to pass out the email, this Exhibit 3, that went from our staff to the Department of Defense, because I'd like to just ask you, what is the problem with the tone of this letter that would lead the Department of Defense not to send us the requirements for an intelligence center?
Mr. Chairman, I haven't seen this particular one. All I can tell you is you asked me in March to do a deep dive, and I got the absolute best experts in the Department of Defense to do that deep dive. It included the Chief Information Officer.
But this is we're the legislative branch of government. We asked in August of 2015, and your Chief Information Officer said that he was told by superiors not to provide the information because of the tone of a letter. This is the letter. And I mean, to me, it seems like a very nice letter. It says, thank you for the quick reply. It even says, thanks for the help.
Mr. Chairman,
is there a problem with the tone of this letter?
Mr. Chairman, I don't know what letter Mr. Halverson was talking about. What I can say is that ever since our first meeting, I said it is very important to the three chairmen
because of the tone of a letter, and this is the letter. And I don't see anything wrong with the tone of the letter.
Well, Mr. Chairman, you mentioned at the early part of the hour that there are two investigations ongoing, one by this committee and one by the DOD-IG, made at your request. Normally, when an IG investigation occurs, we stop all interactions with the committees. But we have said, because this is so important to the chairman, we will continue the interaction with the chairman, and we will be very careful and deliberate on the way that we come forward. I regret that Mr. Halverson used the term tone. I have instructed everyone that we need to be very deliberate because of the close attention that you have placed to this, and I have emphasized to everyone in the chain of command that all of our analysis has to be unimpeachable. And so
Deputy Secretary, I just want to, I understand there are 2 investigations ongoing, but just so you know, this was August.
I have absolute confidence that the J6 on the Joint Staff, the CIO, DISA, and DIA now have come together, worked the information that you requested.
So clearly, Deputy Secretary, you're not responsible for not providing the information, or you don't recall that, but someone in your department told the CIO that. So do you know who would have instructed the CIO?
The meeting with you in March. We've had 6 separate letters, I believe. We've provided over 1,000 pages of documents. We've provided 11 people to testify before the committee. There are people being testified. We believe we have been extraordinarily responsive. You mentioned the GAO report.
I'd like to talk about the responsiveness. This committee's investigation has uncovered multiple instances where the Department of Defense provided information to other committees, particularly the Senate Armed Services Committee, months before providing the same information to this committee. Is it the DoD's policy to provide information to the Senate before providing it to the House?
No, sir, it is not.
Then why did it happen?
Again, sir, we have offered to brief this information to you since May. And twice, once when you...
This has nothing to do with that, Secretary of Work. This has to do with information that...
Mr. Chairman, I would defer all questions to the experts in the J6, the CIO, DISA, and DIA. However, I have been briefed that it is not normal policy for us to go out and say, what is the art of the possible in the future? We do all our analysis on what is available today.
So when the DoD CIO testified before us 2 days ago, he did indicate that they did not ask the local provider. So now I have this is the same question I asked the other day, which is when our bases around the world need extra bandwidth, do we just not ask and we just start laying cables all over the globe? Or do we ask the local provider, can we increase our bandwidth?
Sir, you have to put this within the context of what this question is about. What was better, Croton or Logis? There is no comparison. Croton is absolutely the best information hub.
That's not the question. The question is could the communications infrastructure meet the requirements or not?
I understand that was the question.
That was the question.
But the question you posed to me was whether or not the movement to Croton was operational.
How do you know the answer if you never ask the provider if the local communications infrastructure would work?
I know the answer, sir, because CAPE, who is the best independent cost analysis section that we have in the Department of Defense, took a look at all of the one-time costing factors. They looked at 7. In all of them, there was never an instance where CAPE was able to close the business case for Logis.
We were briefed on the CAPE study. It's quite entertaining. Let me, on September 1st, 2016, you sent a letter to the committee stating that you released funding for phase 2 of the Intelligence Center construction. When did you release the funding?
Soon after that letter, I assume, sir.
Soon after the letter that was dated on September 1st.
I cannot tell you the exact dates that money transferred, but that was the date that I notified you that we were going to go forward. Yes.
There would be no reason for this notification would have been delayed.
I can't imagine one, sir. Now, it might have been delayed simply because of the staffing process of the letter coming up through me. I go through hundreds and hundreds of pages, so perhaps it was delayed slightly.
At the time of your decision, was there an active GAO investigation into this location, into the analysis on this location?
There was an AOA going, an analysis of our AOA, yes.
At the time of your decision, was there an active DOD IG investigation into DOD personnel providing false information to Congress related to this intelligence center?
Yes, and I believe it is ongoing now.
Secretary Lettra, I want to understand how DOD sets requirements for the locations of facilities. We asked you this question earlier this year in closed session, but I want to make sure it's on the record today as well. Does the Department of Defense choose location of facilities based upon where personnel want to live?
We do not. We have a range of factors that go into the decisions about where to base facilities, and particularly when it comes to intelligence facilities, the operational mission orientation and criteria associated with that are the greatest of the factors.
So we choose location of intelligence facilities based upon mission requirements?
That's one of a range of criteria that do factor in, but for me, wearing my intelligence hat and with my intelligence responsibilities, the mission relevance and the ability of that location to service the intelligence mission tends to rise to the top of the list, yes.
Okay, I'm going to stop here and we'll come back later, but I'm going to yield to the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Clapper, I wanted to ask you about your parting thoughts on Russia and the threat posed by Russia. You and the Secretary of Homeland Security acknowledged about a month ago that Russia had been hacking in our political institutions and interfering with our election, and that this was coming from the highest levels of the Kremlin. What is your assessment of whether that activity is the Russians will hack and dump documents that might be damaging to a Trump administration? Would that be consistent with what you know of their playbook?
Thanks for the question, sir. I don't anticipate a significant change in Russian behavior. We gave considerable thought to diming out Russia with that statement. We waited until we felt we had sufficient basis for it, and we did, and both from a forensic and as well as other sources of intelligence that led us to that statement. It may have had the desired effect, since after that, after the issuance of the statement and the communication that I know took place between Russians have a very active and aggressive capability to conduct information operations, so-called hybrid warfare. That's been a long-standing practice of theirs going back to the Soviet era, and I anticipate that it will continue.
Director, I want to drill down a little further into your comment that the Russian activity curtailed after the issuance of the statement. The dumping of documents didn't end with the issuance of the statement. Are you implying by this that that we know whether the documents provided to either cutouts or WikiLeaks had all been provided prior to the statement that was issued? Or is it entirely possible that the dumping of documents continued after the statement, and what may have been avoided was a further escalation of the interference in the form of trying to monkey around on Election Day or thereafter?
I was the WikiLeaks connection. The evidence there is not as strong, and we don't have good insight into the sequencing of the releases or when the data may have been provided. We don't have as good insight into that.
And based on what the Russians have done in Europe and elsewhere, what would you anticipate they would do during the coming administration in terms of their hacking and dumping and active measures campaign in the United States? Director, I think your microphone is off again.
That's hard to say, Congressman Schiff. I can't say what they'll do, and I can't forecast what the impact of our new administration might have on Russian behavior. That's kind of speculative. I just don't know.
Let me ask you about what you can tell us about their intentions vis-a-vis the Minsk Accords and Ukraine. Do you see any intensification of Russian efforts to disrupt the Ukraine or destabilize the Ukraine government? Or do you see efforts in the opposite direction? Are Russian incentives aligned to tamping down the violence there or dialing it up at this point?
I think for now they will sustain their presence in the Donbass. We continue to see firing incidents exchanged along the line of contact, and recently, since yet another reaffirmation of the ceasefire, the number of incidents per week has increased. I think both countries will probably engage in actions and counteractions to try to promote instability. And clearly the Russians want to sustain influence in a traditional part of Greater Russia, which is Ukraine. And so I suspect that sort of pressure will continue. I don't see much prospect for a resolution or compliance with the Minsk Accords. I think we'll just continue this sort of semi-stalemate we're in.